So next up, I want to talk Kalvin Phillips. Obviously, he's been the talk of Twitter at the moment. Rumours that he's not going to be at City. Would you take him back at Leeds United, etc., etc.? I don't want to fully talk about that today. I want to talk about how it all started, where it's gone wrong, and we might touch on, if he came back. Just how good was Kalvin Phillips? How good was he?
He was very good, but it wasn't always very good. And that's, I think, the more important part of this is we can possibly forget what it was like for Kalvin Phillips when he first broke into the Leeds United team. I remember seeing Kalvin Phillips as a very young player playing in the advanced number 10 role, played him in the number 8 role. And he had moments of really, really good skill, or he had a couple of goals where you thought this kid's going to be good. But then there were a lot of moments where there was a large portion of the fans, and, myself included, at a period of time where we just thought, this kid's not going to make it as a number 10. Like, he's not mobile enough. He's not fast enough. He wasn't in the best shape of his career either, in his younger days either. And if you think about just before Bielsa came into Leeds, there was a lot of talk about Kalvin Phillips being sold. It was around the time, like, he was in the team around the time of Alex Mount was there as well. And Mount was the better number 10, was even given the number 10 shirt at one point.
Yeah.
And then Bielsa comes in and he sees number 6 in him, but it wasn't even straightforward under Bielsa. It was a case of he was withdrawn 20 minutes into one game, I think. He was taken off in a couple of games at half-time, which is always very harsh to do to any player. But Bielsa saw something in him, and it was a case of, it's not working, I'm taking you out, we're going to focus on what you need to work on immediately, we're not going to wait, and we just keep chipping away at this. And it happened a couple of times. In the first season under Bielsa, it was awkward for him. It wasn't straightforward enough. And then Bielsa started to trust him, and then Bielsa found that number 6 quarterback role for him, which just absolutely was perfect for Bielsa's system, dropping in between the two centre halves, and we didn't have the ball to protect him as an extra defender. Could play centre back, even played him there a couple of times. But then when you did play out through him, he had that vision and range of passing to put the ball into corners for, some very, very good players like Pablo and even Alioski when he wasn't offside. So he had struggled at times at Leeds. It was never clear. And I think if you look at going to Man City, I just think Pep thought he was getting a player that was ready to just step into that team, and that was never going to be the case. And I don't think if Pep has ever really trusted him as much as Bielsa did. And I think if you look at how Man City are set up, it should be perfect for him. He should be able to sit into that position. But if you're not giving Kalvin game minutes, if you're just relying on him to come off the bench to make an impact, and you're only giving him 3 or 4 minutes at the end of a game, you're not going to see the best of him. He's not going to develop. And if you're relying on training matches and training with better players to get better, he will to a degree. But it's a different tempo to matches. And then when you saw him come into the team this season with Rodri finally being injured for a little bit and give him a chance, they go and buy Kovacic, who's a Champions League winner, CDM. So he's just going to sit in that position instead of him. So I just don't think he's ever really got the run of games at Manchester City that he needed. I don't think Pep has really ever put the arm around the shoulder. And I've talked before about being able to coach good players, or coach players to be better than they are, and then the ability to go and buy good players and make them fit in your team. And Pep Guardiola is known globally as being one of the best coaches in the world. But if you look at the teams he's been with, he's bought a lot of the top players at each club he's been at to create the best teams in the world. Where Bielsa took over a Leeds team that was stuck in 15th in the championship and wasn't going anywhere, and took a player like Kalvin Phillips and coached him to be a 50 million pound player.
Yeah.
And that's the credit to the manager. But if you look at Pep, I just don't think Pep has ever really trusted Kalvin to give him the amount of minutes and the amount of game time he needs to be a successful player. And you can't argue there's an attitude problem there with him, because he just constantly smiles. He comes on for 2 or 3 minutes. He's happy to be there. He picked up his medals last year and you were delighted for him. But I think if he's going to be a success at Manchester City, which I think, honestly, for being honest, I think that time has probably already come and gone. And I think you're looking at a January where he'll probably move on. I think there are clubs that he suits: West Ham, Liverpool. I think he'd be perfect for Liverpool. And that's it. No, but they've already strengthened there. But I think West Ham will have a look at him as well. But It's a shame.
Yeah, well, I just want to touch on it's not just Kovacic, is it? It's that they'll play John Stones there instead. They'll play Rico Lewis. They'll play every other player but Kalvin. And Pep has been quite honest. He said, before he came back overweight, and that can't help a player who's not getting minutes. He's also come back and said he's not the player that he thought he was going to be, or along them lines. I'm kind of paraphrasing there. But as you've been a manager yourself, what are the attributes that you like about Kalvin when he was at his best at Leeds United?
I think his attitude. And that's always the first thing for every player. I mean, again, I work off a model that a guy that I work with works off as well, called KSA, which is knowledge, skills, and attitude. Knowledge, you'll learn over time if you listen. Skill, I can teach you. But attitude is what you bring to the table. And if you bring the wrong attitude, then skill and knowledge no longer mean anything. So you've seen bad players before. Like, look at Balotelli at Manchester City, bags of ability, horrible attitude, just didn't work from Hatem Ben Arfa. Gifted footballer, attitude gets in the way. And we've had a couple of Leeds who've had a few issues with attitude as well. So, Samu Saiz, great player, came into Leeds, wasn't happy, caused some problems, went. So I think attitude is the first thing you need to look at for every player. Do they want to be here? Do they want to improve? And do they want to listen? They're the key fundamentals for every player's development. And then after that, it's, do they fit the system, or can you make them fit the system? Can you coach them into your system? And every top manager has a style of play or an attitude of play. So that's the next thing. And then do they have the abilities you can add to your team to give you what you want from your output? And if you look at Kalvin, passing range was there from a deep line quarterback role. Perfect. Ability to read the game and cut out interceptions or intercept balls that are coming in, protecting the back four, or specifically the back two and the gap between them. I thought he always did a great job of that at Leeds as well. So I think they're the kind of key attributes for me that I used to always look at. Do you want to be here? Can you fit the system? Or can I at least coach you to fit the system? And do you have the attributes that I need from you to benefit the rest of the team? And then that goes through every single player. And that's where you get your web of quality where you can be successful as a group.
No, I mean, I absolutely love that. I love the KSA. I like that. People have been talking Kalvin back to Leeds. It's been a bit of an unrealistic thing. People are saying it on Twitter, and they go, no, don't want to talk about it. Don't want, this is well out of it. He's going to go somewhere else. But, it's not fully unrealistic. If we go up, Kalvin's not getting the game time at City. Could we see him back in a Leeds shirt next year?
It would depend on the ownership. I mean, they've already said that they will give Daniel Farke the funds to be a success next time he gets to the Premier League with Leeds. So the money is there. We know there's restrictions this year on what they can spend, but we know that they've already kind of said next year, if we are in the Premier League, those restrictions aren't as small or as tight. There's a lot more room for them to be creative with the money. The question isn't, is Kalvin Phillips coming back to Leeds? The question is, would you take him back at Leeds? That's the question. And that's the thing where people are getting a bit wound up over the wrong question. And I think you never say no to quality players. If you've got the option to bring in a quality player, you bring in a quality player. You never say no to a quality player, because you'll go somewhere else and there'll be quality against you. So you may as well have them. And I think, with Kalvin's skill set, it's a slightly different system now. Does he suit a double pivot is another question where, maybe he could do it slightly. If you look at how Ampadu plays, I think Kalvin could do that as well. But I think if he doesn't go anywhere in January, and I think he will go somewhere in January, at least on loan. But I think if he doesn't go anywhere in January, and if Leeds get promoted, there is an absolute chance that Kalvin would want to come back to Leeds, because he's gone off, he's won his league, he's got his league winners medal, he's got his Champions League winners medal, he's got his League Cup winners medal. Great. Now, you got what you wanted. Now, was the grass greener? Possibly not. Now come back. And I think that's a serious possibility that he could come back next year. I mean, has his value increased in his time at Manchester City? Would you look at the amount of games he's played? 14 games in 2 seasons for Manchester City. 14, 2 this year, 12 last season.
How many of starts?
I'd say half of them, if even. No, last year, I don't think he started a game last season in the league anyway. This year he started 1, I think, or 1 or 2 this year. But the rest have been substitute appearances. I mean, he's got as many European appearances last season as he has league appearances this season,
Wow.
Which is not great. It's 3 versus 2. But I think his value probably hasn't increased. If anything, it's probably gone down a bit. I think if Man City were looking at selling, they couldn't justify asking for 50 or 60 million pounds for the player, because over the last 2 seasons, he's shown them that he's not a top 2 player. Now, I disagree with that, but that's what he's shown in that club. So his value is probably, worst case scenario, still around 40 million. And I think if Leeds go to the Premier League, we've talked before about Leeds were shopping in the 20, 30 million pound bracket in the Premier League the last time they were there, and it was probably the wrong end of the market to be shopping in. Next time Leeds go up, they'd be shopping in the 40, 50 million pound bracket, and Kalvin fits into that bracket perfectly. And you could get him for less than that, again. So I think there's a very strong possibility, if Leeds wanted to bring him back, and if he doesn't go anywhere in January, that you could potentially see Kalvin back at Leeds. And then the question is, would you want him back at Leeds? And for me, again, I would always say yes to a quality player.